right, everybody, welcome back. It is Tuesday night. It is time for our weekly conversations with Commodores, and you guys are in luck tonight. I've got my roommate from sophomore year coming out of South Florida, Fred Peterson, is our guest tonight. Petey, good to see you, bud.
Howdy.
Glad that you have some time for us tonight. Hope all's well in South Florida.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful day here in South Florida. Lovely winter day, nice 75 degrees. Good times.
It is good times, and we've had some good times in the past, and we're going to relive a little bit of that tonight. But before we jump back in the Wayback Machine, tell folks a little bit about your current version of Fred Peterson and what's going on in your world.
Oh gosh, current version of Fred Peterson. Well, Fred Peterson lives back in his hometown where I lived before I went up to Vanderbilt. These days, both kids are married. My daughter's 31. She lives in Atlanta. She got married last year. My son, Matthew, got married the year before. He's 29 now, and they live close by. They're in Orlando, he and his wife. And now it's just Dean and I here, kind of living the best life here in Florida. Just enjoying it, getting to spend time with the kids and do some fun things. We like to travel with the kids pretty frequently and see them often. Actually, just had dinner with Matthew last night.
Very good. And I got to see you and Dina back in December here in town in the bowl game. And
Was a lot of fun.
That it was a lot of fun until 7 minutes and 17 seconds to go in the game. and
if that game had just continued, that break gave Georgia Tech a spark. They would have just kind of petered out at the end of that game, I do think. But
it's if any of you who followed the Vanderbilt football program for any periods of time, you know that Florida, particularly South Florida, has tons and tons of athletes, and Vanderbilt has had our fair share in all the sports. And this is where I'm going to ask you, Fred, that during the 80s, when you and I were coming up, there were other athletes, not just in football, but in other sports, who were also on campus during our time period. So I'm going to jog your memory a little bit. Of course, we got Will Perdue from Merritt Island, not far from you.
Played against them in high school.
Yep. I'm going to say we got Jeff Mays, and I'm just going to throw it to you to remember some of those Florida guys who were not only on the football program, but maybe any of the other teams that we had.
Dante Ferguson, Fort Pierce, Tony Piercy was from down here. Scott Penny. I think Scott was from up like Daytona Beach, Ormond Beach. I know that's where he lives these days. Noah
Wells.
Noah Wells. I know he lives up in that part of the state now. I think that's where he was from. Gosh, I'm trying to think of others. Those are the ones that kind of come top to mind at the moment.
Well, there's and we'll, as we go through here, if you guys can think of others, there's been countless athletes before and since, but Florida just seems to produce so many athletes, including one in particular from Stuart, Florida. How did you end up? Why not go to one of the Florida state schools or any other? How'd you end up at Vanderbilt?
That's a good question, I guess. Honestly, I was never one that really thought hard about college football when I was, freshman, sophomore. Really even in my junior year was when I started kind of getting interest and thinking, well, gosh, this might be something that I might do. I did have some interest. I actually went on one of my official recruiting visits down to the University of Miami. Butch Davis was the recruiting coach at that point. I went down there, but, I really tended towards, I wanted to be an engineer. So I really tended towards the schools where that was possible. I joke, I tell people, when I told them on my recruiting trip at Miami that I wanted to be an engineer, they laughed at me and said, well, you can't do that here. They were like, you don't have time for that. And so, at the end of the day, I had scholarship offers. I had an appointment to the Naval Academy. I also had a scholarship offer to Georgia Tech, and just chose Vanderbilt. Loved the city, loved the feel, the thought of playing in the SEC. And then, the ability to pursue my dream and get an engineering degree was all right there. So it just made a lot of sense.
And come full circle, your Emily ended up graduating from Georgia Tech.
My Emily did end up graduating from Georgia Tech.
I
So
just
while I didn't go there, a lot of my money did a few years back.
Now I hope that at the Birmingham Bowl you didn't give her too hard of a time.
No, thankfully, she was going to come with me to the game, but unfortunately, she was sick, and so thankfully she missed out on my getting to rib her throughout the game, and
As well
also
as
the late
I
game.
missed out getting to give her a hard time. So Emily, this is for you. Anchor down.
Anchor down.
Fred, I just from your knowing your personality, I just could not see you at the U in the 80s. That just didn't
No, it was really
seem
not a great trip. I was like, there
yeah.
is no way I'm going to go to school here.
You might, I don't know if they won the title during our years. I can't remember, but it would have been a different experience, that's for sure, had you gone there.
Georgia Tech did win the co-national championship
They did.
in 1990 with what, Colorado, I guess.
Colorado. Yep.
Yeah. But I was happy for the decision, even though I did have to room with you for a year.
Hey, easy. We'll get to that in a minute. Did, uh, did you come on a recruiting visit? And if so, did you have, who were your hosts or what do you remember from the recruiting visit?
I actually don't remember who my host was at the recruiting visit. Honestly, the most memorable part of my recruiting visit was one Wally Hubert. Um,
One of our
true
future
to
teammates. He
one
was
of
there
our
on the same
future
visit?
teammates.
Yeah.
Had just a ton of fun hanging out with Wally that weekend.
Mhm.
Coach Mantooth was the coach that recruited me
Mhm.
from there, and my dad actually came up with me on the trip. And Coach Mantooth and my dad, did their chewing tobacco and stuff, and just chatted and whatnot. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, that is, those recruiting visits are make or break it. They can either seal the deal or you just know, like when you went to Miami, you just know that that's just not the place you're going to end up for 4 years.
No, for sure, for sure.
What were there any kids from your high school, either before you or during our senior year, who also ended up at Vanderbilt? Did you know anybody at Vanderbilt before you reported in August that senior of our freshman year?
There were really only two people from my high school. There was an older girl by the name of Kim, who is a year older. And then our year, there was a girl, Tracy, who was in my graduating class from Martin County. But that was it. Nobody else that I'm aware of. Not until later, after I had graduated, I think that anybody else from my high school go up there.
And we're so old that when we came through, there was no social media, there was no internet.
No.
So the first I learned of everybody in our class is when they mailed us these short bios. You remember receiving this in the mail?
Oh yeah, I can remember looking through all the pictures,
Yeah.
um, and reading about all the different people and where they were from, and
Yeah.
then showing up on campus. And we were there a couple weeks early, and not
Mhm.
knowing who my roommate was going to be or anything. It was I don't know, just a different experience than what you got now. I know my
Yeah.
daughter, when she went to Georgia Tech, she picked her roommate online via Facebook or whatever. Kind of went through a whole different process. We just showed up and we're like, all right, whatever.
You get what you get. That's right.
Get what you get.
And not everybody from our signing class even reported to campus. There was a guy named David something who I think ended up at Navy. There may have been two people from that list who just never even came to campus. And then we had a couple of guys who didn't really last more than maybe one semester or one school term. But
Beatty,
that's
I
pretty
think,
common.
didn't Beatty left after
Jim
a
did.
semester? Yeah,
Yeah,
Jim.
Jim was he started out as my roommate and we ended
Right,
up switching around and he ended up with Thor, of course.
right.
Chris Twist was there for a hot minute or two. And but we're getting kind of in the weeds here a little bit. I wanna ask you if you recall your first impressions when you first got to campus. I don't know if you came just like a day or so before we were supposed to be there, were you in town any earlier than the reporting date,
No,
August?
I showed up at the right at the end when we were supposed to report. I just remember we stayed at the Holiday Inn, right? That it overlooked the practice fields.
Mhm.
And I just kind of remember, looking out my hotel room window thinking, all right, are you, let's go. Like just the whole thought of this is a whole new ball game. This is
Yeah.
totally different than what I've been doing.
Mhm.
And kind of excited, kind of a little bit nervous too, to get out there for the first time on that field. And that was really my first impression. And when it really sunk in that, I'm here and I'm doing this.
And unlike some of our teammates from the north, because we had lots of guys from Chicago and Michigan and just truly in the north, you were used to from growing up the humidity and the heat.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm sure it was actually a little bit of a reprieve being about 700 miles north of your home, the experience you grew up in weather-wise.
You know what the craziest thing, Bernard, was? My high school, my coach was old school, and we had this like drinking trough, right? It was just a big piece of PVC that had a bunch of holes in it.
Yep.
And I mean, we were doing two-a-days in August in South Florida, and it was brutal, but they wouldn't let us get drinks. Like our coach would tell us that we were soft and weak if we wanted to get a drink of
Yep.
water.
Yep.
So we'd
Yep.
go
Yep.
an hour, 2 hours of practice
Mhm.
without water. And I can remember being at practice and like asking permission. Am I allowed to get a drink? And then, the trainer's kind of looking at me like, please hydrate. And I was like, well, nobody's ever let me do that before. It was just such a
They were
strange
probably
thing.
handing out salt tablets as well.
But I mean, so the heat and that didn't bother me because, again, I mean, South Florida, our whole season was hot.
Your whole life
Um,
was humidity and hot.
the whole time. And I worked construction in the summertime for my dad, so I was used to just being outside all day and sweating. Just didn't even think about it.
And one of the things, with me growing up in South Alabama, it's a very similar weather and experience. But seeing some of these guys new to the South and the summer, even though they were fabulous athletes and in great shape, that was the equalizer. They had to learn in a hurry that you had to stay hydrated or your body could not. They would start shutting down. So it was always very interesting to me to see how guys were responding to
Yep.
that. What would
Well, and if you remember the time that Mac McCarroll got dehydrated at practice, that was
Yeah.
such a huge lesson in why you hydrate.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
I can remember Mac, was like body was like tensing up like and making him laugh and he's just like stop, it's making me cramp.
Well, I was going to
Um
say his whole body, and what happens is your whole body starts to cramp
yeah.
up. Yeah.
And the weigh in before and after practice, thinking again, nothing we ever did in high school.
No,
And
but
it was just
you
such a
could
strange
swing.
thing for me. I was like, wow, why are they doing that? And then you were like, you mean I lost 8 pounds at practice,
Yeah, I was going to say 8 to 12 pounds of swing weight was pretty normal,
Yeah.
but thankfully the sports medicine guys, the training guys, they were on top. I think they were as high tech at Vanderbilt as it was in the country at that time. Um, So I
No,
never there were
definitely.
issues. I guess I was happy for that to be in place. What do you remember about those first days? Um, whether it was your impressions of in the dorms and you starting to room with Andy or just the responsibilities of what we had to be on a schedule. What was some of those impressions, if you recall that time period?
Those first days at practice, because the underclassmen, or the freshmen showed up for a little bit of time to kind of get broken in before the upperclassmen showed up. And I can remember those first days of, hitting and thinking, all right, this is the next level. It's not the same. Those were the days when we still did, Oklahoma drills and whatnot. And, just thinking, all right, this is big time now. And just getting to know people again. First for me, really, it was the first time I was ever really away from home.
Mhm.
I had never gone to camp or done anything like that. And so, it was a big adjustment, getting used to just kind of being on your own schedule. Yes, we had a firm schedule, but in between being on your own. I don't know. It was a good time. I mean, those, you look back, and as much as it was a lot of work, it was just a lot of fun. Those are, great
Yeah.
memory building time for sure for
Well,
me.
plus we all couldn't be Arnouts and just show up whenever you wanted to. Just no rules applied. Not that he's watching us right now, but I'm trying to get a rise out of him. We'll see if he responds. But
Yeah, well, there's some good stuff about Arnotts, but probably not for public consumption.
well, he's already been on the show. He's been able to share a little bit, and if he wants to come back on, we can get deep in the woods. But
I roomed with him when when we were traveling, and it was
oh,
always
as did I. But
and so
man,
the sound of the nose clearing in the middle
that's
of the
right.
night.
Um, the speed is what really is what impressed me. This not just the speed. I had speedy guys on my team who I threw to all the time. It was the speed of the linemen. It was the speed of the linebackers. It was the cover speed of the DBs that I had to get used to. You couldn't just put a lazy pass out there because it was going to get knocked down or intercepted. But it was that was part of the game for me that I had to quickly adjust to. Um, Arnout
Well,
said,
coming around was it our sophomore year when we were running the wishbone offense? I was a pass blocking, tackle primarily in high school, and coming around the corner, and when we'd run drills or whatever, and as a freshman, as
yeah.
I can remember running drills and coming around the corner, and there's Chris Gaines,
Mm-hmm.
quick, hit hard. And I remember just like, wow, all right, here we go again. Those are some pretty brutal hits in practice, and just quick and powerful.
Nout said he remembers swearing at the coaches, yelling, Mac is dying. He was next to Mac when Mac went down. And at
Right.
the same time, Henry Beelan was having an asthma attack. So I can only imagine what that space right there was like for a hot minute. My gosh.
Yeah. Yeah,
Move the
for
drill
sure.
up 10 yards. Let's keep going. I'm sure was the mentality.
Yeah. I remember when I went down, that was it, right? I hurt my knee in practice when I blew out my knee, and all you remember hearing is move the drill.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
everybody just kind of goes on, and then you're just laying there like, all right, what's next?
Well, was meeting head up with Chris Gaines, was that one of your welcome to the SEC moments?
It really was. Because again, running scout team my freshman year, and you're doing those blocks. And I mean, he never let up, right? I mean, he hit hard all the time.
No, I was right there with you. And if for those who don't know, I'm sure you do, Chris still may be our all-time at least game tackling leader. He had 37 tackles against Tulane, I think in 1987. We were there, and it was the same game that Stump had the 100-yard kickoff return. We still lost, but
Yeah.
I've never seen an accomplishment like Chris in that game with those tackles. But he was all football, all business. He'd knock
Oh
your
yeah.
block off, he'd pick you up, tell you you're doing fine, and see you in the next play.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Inch for a minute. Let's talk about Rip Rowe and Andy McCarroll. Andy bursts on the scene with his older brother already on campus. The McCarrolls have a long tradition at Vanderbilt, but Andy didn't just blend like the rest of us freshman year. And I'm gonna let you pick it up from there.
I don't even know where to go with that, Bernard. I mean, when I walked into my room that first time when we were checking in, and I had the chance to meet Andy. Again, I'm a Florida boy, and we're not exactly Southern, but here's this, you know, just built character with this, Southern draw, and just good old Southern boy, and but very proper. And I mean, we fell in right away, and really kind of hit it off. But he just had his own vibe. But he was a great roommate, and just lots of fun memories and fun times that we had together. But yeah, he was a unique character, to be sure.
Back during that time period, and maybe even now, if you were to look in a dictionary and it says Vandy Man,
Andy was it,
There'd be a picture.
right?
Academics, athletics,
Finalist
the
for Rhodes
looks, the whole
Scholar,
thing.
just in the library all the time, studying, deep thinker. I'm just like, oh, dude, that's like too much. Like, I don't know that I can talk through, Plato and whatnot, after practice and before I got into my studying.
Last comment or last compliment, and then we're going to trash him for a second. But
All right.
humility. Andy's always had humility. He's never been a, front of the jersey or excuse me, back of the jersey guy. He wants you to know that he's a Vanderbilt guy through and through. But we've always enjoyed our friendship with Andy, even as goofy as he is. And poor guy, back then they really weren't called concussions, but he had his bell rung so many times during those years.
Yeah.
It was pretty sad sometimes to just you're hoping that whatever protocol he needed to go through to get his head straight, and ultimately, of course, he did. But it was tough to see sometimes.
Yeah, he got popped a few times and was kind of out of it.
Yeah.
It was entertaining to chat with him during those episodes, but yeah, I felt bad for him for sure.
Well, Fred, as a lot of guys do, we talk on the show about when it's time to hang up the cleats. If you're able to call your own shot, you retire after a lengthy NFL career. A lot of us retire after our eligibility is up. We just know there's an end date. We're not going to the next level. But then for some, it's because of injury, and injury concludes a career that may or may not have developed the way that we wanted to. And I know that you had a very serious injury early on in your career. I want to take you to that just for a minute or two, because what I thought, and I've never expressed this to you, is how you handled it. It would have been very easy for you to frankly just withdraw from the school. You could have gone back home. You didn't have to stay there, but you didn't just go away. You were in the thick of it with all of us, even the guys on the active roster, because you still were in everything. So share a little bit about that time period. And here's the real question. How did you pull yourself through that? Because that wasn't easy, I'm sure.
I mean, it's a good question. I think the hard part, in some of the injuries, the one that probably bothers me the most sometimes is one that most people would not really have thought about. I don't know if you remember, we were in the weight room doing, I don't know, like 100 rep sets on the leg press machine or whatever. And I ruptured a blood vessel in my right eye, and it didn't hurt. I just remember thinking, gosh, I have my vision has gone red, and like I just wasn't sure. It was like somebody just put like a red lens in front of it.
Yeah.
And that was Valentine's Day actually, and I was supposed to go out on a date with my then girlfriend, now wife.
Your
And
eye looked so gnarly. It looked like somebody had taken a stick and just punctured your eye.
but that was really the first one. And I mean, I was a couple days in the hospital for that because they weren't sure, like what was going on. Did I tear my retina or something like that? And we'll touch back on that later. But then, when gosh, it was the last day of practice before the spring game, sophomore year, when I tore my, ACL, and that was pretty painful, and again, the whole move the drill. And I can remember, Norwig checking my leg on the field, and it's just popping out of joint. Like it was so loose. And he's like, all right, let's get you in. And then, an hour later, Pinky Lipscomb shows up and, wants to do the same thing. But by that time, you've lost the adrenaline, your muscles have stiffened up, and he's trying to like jerk my leg, test my knee. And you're just like, dude, that really hurts. And he's like, oh, I don't think it's torn or whatever. And Norwig's like, yeah, you might want to do some different tests. And the next
Let
day,
me pause you for 2 seconds because I want to
yeah,
set for those who don't know. John Norwig was our trainer at the time. He ended up with the Steelers for 30 years, Hall of Fame in the NFL for what he has done. He's recently retired. But back then, John was probably in his mid 30s. Pinky Lipscomb was our longtime orthopedic surgeon for the Vanderbilt sports programs, he had to have been in his 70s at that time. So there was such a different in philosophies about the approach to sports medicine that that's what you're describing right now. But go ahead, Fred.
Yeah. But they drained the fluid off my knee, and it was all blood, and that was Saturday that I got hurt, and on Monday I was on the operating table getting my knee repaired. Um, and I rehabbed that year, and kind of was ready to go late in the season, but they were like, just wait, we'll come back. So, I made it through like 3 weeks of spring practice and then got hit again. And the meniscus, was still messed up in my knee, and I had to have surgery again. And it was really at that point, and one of our teammates, right, was offensive guard Mike Johnson, right, Spike. And I can remember Spike graduated a couple years before us, I guess 2 years or whatever. But he showed up at practice and he had a cane. And I remember thinking, okay, he's 22 years old and he's walking on a cane because he had like 5 or 6 knee surgeries. And I remember chatting with him, saying, hey, Spike, was it worth it? Like, I'm in this position now where I'm, having my second surgery. And, and Spike just said, he goes, I didn't really think about the rest of my life and, my kids and, those types of things. And sadly, Spike died when he was fairly young, but that really stuck with me. And so, my senior year, when given the option because of the various injuries and stuff that I had, I opted to take a medical at that point, getting to the part of your question. And for me, that was a big part of my decision. I was like, I loved football and it was a tough decision. I can remember walking into Coach Warhop's office to tell him, that, I'm going to step back. And it was very emotional for me. But I just kind of took the long view and said, as much as I love this and, I'll miss it and what might have been for me, I just was like, I have a whole life ahead of me. And I'm just not sure, given, the injuries that I had that, I was ready to keep going. And so I did step back. But I didn't want to not be involved. For me, part of the, playing football was, the ability to get an education. My parents didn't have a ton of money, and, to get a Vanderbilt education, there was no way I was going to walk away from that. So I, went and Norwig and Coach Bates were both like, hey, come work for us. So I was kind of like, hey, who's going to bid the highest for me? But, really just opted just because of, how much Coach Bates really meant to me and, what an inspiration he was. Not that Norwig wasn't, but, just really took up that opportunity and, worked in the weight room my senior year. So still felt like I was involved with the team and involved and helping. But, again, just taking that long view. And honestly, now as I'm, 56 years old, I need to have both of my knees replaced. It's just a matter of timing of when it gets too much. I'm bone on bone in both of my knees, and my orthopedic surgeon's like, you just tell me when you're ready, when you can't take the pain anymore. But I'm still stubborn and I tough it out. My eye injury, I've had 2 eye surgeries since. I had to have my retina fixed. And that surgery caused me to have cataracts. So I had to have cataract surgery. I feel like an old man.
Yeah, but
But
you don't just sit on the couch all day. You're an extremely active
oh,
dude, and that's as important as really anything. But I want to back up just a second. When you made that
sure.
decision, you had a not so secret weapon in your corner helping you to make decisions, and she's still helping you to make decisions. Dina has
Yep.
been, I've known Dina, what, 38 years now or something like that, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
And if you guys have ever known of Fred, you also know of Dina. And she may be short in stature, but that's all she's short in because she is awesome. And you guys have made a fabulous couple for all those years and been dear friends. But I want to talk about Dina for just a second. I remember when she first started coming around. I remember how giddy you were. And I just remember having many, many good times with her and Andy and group. But Dina has always been that voice of reason to me. And did she play a part in your decision making when it came to taking the medical and helping you to get through that time period?
I mean, certainly we talked about it, but she just didn't feel like at that time she could really speak into that part of my life, right? To say, what I could or shouldn't do because, it's kind of your dream, right? Like the chance to play. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, we did talk about it, but she definitely left that one to me in the end. But again, like I said, the most impactful thing was my chat with Spike.
Oh,
Really
sure,
just
sure.
struck home with me. But Dina's always been there and always supportive of me. So she's like, whatever you want to do, I'm here to support. So
Nouts said he got his right knee replaced. It hurt, but great results. He's doing the other knee in 2 weeks. Tell Fred to do it. He was very happy that he finally did it.
yeah, no, I know. I've gotten to that
Thank you,
point. Like I
Jim.
said, it's painful. As Bernard, I hike all the time. I love
Yeah.
being out, but after about 4 miles, I'm like, okay, that's about it.
Yeah.
Time to go.
One of my early memories of our freshman year is not just seeing you and Andy and some of the guys we've mentioned, but when we reported, I had already been on campus for a couple of weeks. I had had my elbow surgery right after graduation. I came up to rehab. That's a whole nother story. Watson was not happy with me because I didn't tell him about it, but it was Dr. James Andrews. What's he, anyway. So I come up to campus to rehab. I also am taking a class, just getting the feel for, what's it all about. And being around Greg Smith, who's not short, being around you, who's not short, all these big dudes. And I'm like, how in the world am I going to throw over the top? It's like, that's not the answer. It's the alleys that you have to find. But
Right.
that was an adjustment for me. Trying to, Denardi playing O-line, who's 6'5", you 6'5" plus. You guys are, I'm standing here at 5'11", and I've got to do my looks. But that was just another part of my transition from an athletic standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of transitions. I mean, heck, in
Yep.
high school, I played offensive and defensive tackle, and my senior year, I never left the field.
Mhm.
And my first 2 days at Vanderbilt, I got assigned to Coach Shepard on the D line, and I guess I don't know, I must not have been quick enough or something, because he jettisoned me fast and pushed me over to the O line. But again, that I played both, so it didn't really matter to me. But big adjustments, in terms of how you did things. And like I had mentioned before, the whole wishbone offense, I was just like, oh no, because by the time I hit 300 pounds, I was getting kind of sluggish. That was a lot scary, and my body wasn't quite prepared for that.
And we changed 3 offenses in the 4 years we were there. We just
Yeah.
did because of the different personnel. I want to step
Yeah,
back.
what Mark Ratcher threw 60 times a game,
Mhm.
whatever our freshman year.
Yeah, when he was standing upright.
When he
Um,
was standing upright.
let's talk about time away from football obligations. You found plenty of things that you were interested in, that you were involved in. What did you do to get away from the grind of football when you had that spare time when you weren't studying or sleeping?
Really, for me, it was more just hanging out with friends. Bernard, I think, as I got involved with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, guys like Johnny Clark and Tom Gray and Mark Berry, and so I got involved with that. I actually did my first public speaking, going out to do that. And I always joked with Dina because we met freshman year and dated all through college.
Mhm.
She got an hour a day, so I had to carve out that time. So just
Yeah.
spending time, and it was good to spend time with groups of people kind of outside of football and class. And so I just really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the outdoors at that time. I grew up hunting, fishing, out in the woods, so I'd haul myself out to Percy Priest and do a little bit of fishing and stuff like that, which was always fun. And
And
that was kind of my escape, and still is.
and never enough time getting to do that in the spring. We were so busy in the fall, you never had time to go to the lake or go for a hike. Found plenty of time in the spring and the summer, but you're right. There was always that for me that pull to get away from campus. But a lot of guys, and I talk about this frequently on the show, is they usually have one of two experiences. They either stay in what I call the McGugan bubble. They're comfortable with their teammates or other athletes, and that really is enough for them from a networking and a social standpoint. Then you have the other group who network, who get out, who may join a fraternity or a sorority or join other organizations. And football is part of what they do, but it's not the central focus of what they do. Now, either way you go with your experience, that doesn't guarantee you're going to have an awesome experience or a bad one. It's just interesting to me which route most student athletes take. Like I spent way too much time in the McGugan bubble. I didn't socialize as much as I would have looking back, should have or could have, but I was comfortable with that. You, from my experience, you weren't necessarily in that McGugan bubble all the time because you had FCA, you had other avenues of things you could explore. Is that a fair assessment of your experience?
Yeah, no, I've always been, I just like the variety of experience, right? I mean, getting out, getting to, hang with other people. A lot of the folks that were from our freshman hall, guys like Dave Wathen and
Mhm.
Eric Graham and different folks, I mean, hanging out with them and just doing some of the regular student things
Mhm.
was just enjoyable. It was a good break, right? Because football, you spend so much time. And then being an engineer, you spend a lot of time in class. So when you could carve out a few hours to just kind
Yeah.
of step outside of that and say, I want to do something. I want to play some board games or, go for a walk or a hike or something. It was just nice to be able to do some of that kind of stuff.
Or in January of our freshman year, we go down to Municipal Auditorium and we're in the first or second row of what concert?
Rat, baby, rat.
And
That
they
was, what were they filming, a music video for
round and
Round and
round
Round?
video.
And I remember it was you, me, Wally, and a couple of guys from our freshman hall.
Yeah.
Um,
It's,
and
we've got a picture somewhere of us.
There's a picture.
Yeah.
We played the part, baby, and that was a ton of fun. I
Oh,
remember
old.
we were right up at the front of the stage
Yep.
and people were crushing in and, being the big guys up at the front, we could kind of hold our own. That was a blast. We had a good time.
And you, if you remember, Municipal Auditorium, I think is long since torn down. It wasn't even the Ryman, the classic place where
Oh,
everybody goes. We went to the old crappy Municipal Auditorium Nashville used to have. And I want to talk a little bit about this. This is going to make me sound like I'm the old guy on stay off my lawn. But all of us have been to Nashville in the last 10, 15 years, and it's just blown up, Lower Broad, all of that. It's just, to me, it's Times Square South. But when we were in school, it wasn't that way. What do
oh,
you
goodness,
remember
no.
from that part of the town?
Well, I mean, you had Second Avenue was what? Old Spaghetti Factory, which we would go hang out at. I've got
Yep,
some pictures of,
yep, yep.
you, me, Wally, our girlfriends,
Newman, yep.
John Newman, and but Old Spaghetti Factory, Mayor Bowls, and I don't know, something else. And a good time on a Friday or Saturday night, out of season
Mhm.
was, sometimes we'd go hang out at night court, and just watch the people come through because there was nothing going on down that way.
There was Printer's Alley, which was pretty
Printer's
rough
Alley.
at that time. There was also some, I'll call them gentlemen's clubs that
Yeah.
were down there. But
Well, there
other
was
than
what?
that,
Ernest Tubbs record shop and a bunch of peep shows was
right,
basically
right,
everything else that was down
right.
there.
And I mean that, and it truly was probably very similar in a very small way to what parts of New York, Manhattan were in the 80s, 70s and
Yeah.
80s. But now it's come full circle to there be 250,000, 500,000 visitors down there now at any given weekend. And it's just incredible what it has become from where it was so many, a few decades back.
Yep.
Yeah, now you
Yeah,
don't
it's so
go
different. I
find
was just there 2 weeks ago, and we were
Yeah,
downtown for a conference, and man, just honky tonks, and it is nothing like the
yeah.
Nashville of our youth.
Well, for those of you who are just joining us or may catch us later on YouTube, I've got my sophomore roommate, Fred Peterson from Stuart, Florida. Fred came in same year as me in the fall of '86. We were with Watson Brown's first recruiting class. And I know we keep jumping around a little bit, but I want to take you to when did Mantooth, Shepherd, or even Watson first get on your radar, first contact you to start talking about coming for a visit or even making an offer to you? When was that during your high school year?
My junior year, and Watson was still at Rice.
Hmm.
Um, and that's I think I still have the letters that I got. Yeah, they were at Rice, and that's when I got contacted by them.
Yeah. There were a lot of guys who were being recruited at Rice, but then if you remember, Watson came over at the end of the season.
Yeah,
McIntyre it was the previous coach, but it's in that back then we just had the February signing period, the first Wednesday in February.
yep.
So Watson really only had like end of November, December, January to put together his class, and probably about a third to maybe half of you guys, not me, but a good percentage of you guys who ended up signing with me at Vanderbilt were from that Rice recruiting efforts.
Yeah, that was my contact. And like I said, it was kind of a bit of a shock when he jumped over. But again, it was fortuitous for me. Again, Rice, similar to Vandy and Georgia Tech,
Mhm.
were the kind of schools where I
Yeah.
could actually go get an engineering degree.
Fred, we, as we all do, we ended up graduating after 4.5 years. I know you had another few weeks or few months after us in May of '90. Fast forward to even in the last 15 or 20 years, if you've reflected back about what did your Vanderbilt experience mean to you at that time, and or excuse me, now, is it more important to you as you get older? Was it more important to you in those first years when you came out of school? Can you kind of quantify or put it into perspective about the way you felt?
I'll answer that in two ways, Bernard. The first
Mhm.
one is just more personal. They were just great years for me because, as I mean, my childhood was a little traumatic in some ways, and Vanderbilt was a fresh start, was a new start for me. And so the friendships that were formed,
Mhm.
the people that we went to, school with and played ball with, just really meaningful
Mhm.
friendships. And you go through that experience together. It's bonding. You spend that much time together, you sweat, you work out, you earn your SMA shirt together. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it really draws you together. And so great fond memories. And so Vanderbilt really for me has always been just a keystone event in my life, because it was that transition, as so many people do in college, from your life as a child and a teen growing up in your in your parents' home, to kind of that bridge to being on your own. And it really just gave me a great foundation, and I have nothing but fond memories. Still, love Vanderbilt, love to follow the program, through all the ups and downs, because it's that shared experience. And so that's one part. I mean, so very close to my heart always. The other part is from a professional standpoint, and this might sound weird, but I would say this to maybe any of the younger guys that might listen, or even somebody stumbles across this and is considering Vanderbilt as a destination. I'm 56 years old, and I've been in sales, for a good part of my career.
Mhm.
I'm obviously not a small guy. So when I walk, I'm always meeting new people. And I'm talking CEOs to, just people working in IT, because I work in tech. whatever, all levels of organizations. And, when you first meet people, as much as sometimes I roll my eyes, the first question is, wow, you're a big guy. Did you play football? That's a very common question as an icebreaker,
Yeah.
as you can imagine in a business setting, and I'm like, yes. And then that leads to the, obvious questions after where, what position, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you time and time again, people will be like, oh, Vanderbilt, like,
Mhm.
it resonates with them that you played sports
Mhm.
and got a degree from Vanderbilt. It's kind of this instant check mark. Like, okay, this guy has something going on, right? Like he's a smart guy and he's disciplined.
Mhm.
And as odd as that seems, that's just been something that throughout my sales career, I never seem to be able to get away from. I mean, and it's a good thing, but it's an interesting element of having gone to Vanderbilt. It's just kind of this credibility that you carry around with you and you don't ask for it. I never asked for it, but again, it just being the biggest guy in the room always generally leads to somebody questioning me.
That's like the perfect answer right there. Both parts. The football, the brotherhood, the friendships, the lifelong bonding is so incredibly important. It wouldn't have mattered to me tonight had you been a 4-year starter, all SEC, gone to the pros, all of that. We probably would not have talked about much of that because it's about your journey. It's about how
Absolutely.
you impacted Vanderbilt and how Vanderbilt impacted you. You met the love of your life, and you met Dina, and you met and you made some
Are you
good
the love of
friends.
my life, Bernard? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm just
What are
waiting
you
for you to say
getting
it,
to here
buddy.
on this call?
No disrespect, DP. But no,
Let's spit some pepperonis at you.
that's right. We're 18 to 22-year-olds, knuckleheads going through, just trying to figure out who we are. And at the end of the process, you're supposed to at least have a little bit better understanding who you are. But you're so right. Those friendships have remained. We've been in each other's weddings and vacations and all this great stuff over the years. And then you also have the Vanderbilt component that you played ball at Vanderbilt, and that says something. You graduated from Vanderbilt. That says something even more. And the fact that you still support your program and wear your colors and go to games and things, I think that just kind of sums up the whole experience, at least for me, in such a positive way. And I hope that more student athletes have those experiences because, when we first got out of school, I didn't want anything to do with the sport. I was done. I was mentally exhausted of it, physically just done with it. And it took years, almost a decade, for me to even enjoy college football again and come back into the fold of watching games and then Vanderbilt. And I don't know if you had that experience post college about being away from the game, but a lot of guys do. But that's just my experience.
It's just such a busy time of life, right? I mean, Dean and I got married right after we graduated. We were married 3.5 years when we started having kids. And it's, those years can be a blur.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, there were good times and, we still got together with, as we were chatting the other day, still going through old pictures and thinking, I spent that much time with Bernard after I didn't have to anymore. I was like, what was I thinking?
Yes, you did, buddy.
Yay. But, I mean, so, those years were a bit of a blur. I probably didn't pay as much attention to football just because I had so many other things going on. But it was always there, right? I mean, it was always something that, even if I wasn't watching the game, I know I was checking scores and, just you're always hoping like this is going to be the year, right? It's that eternal optimism that, Vanderbilt is going to be on the map. That was what made this past season so exciting is any given Saturday, right? It's like anything could happen. Like this is
Right.
exciting. Like I want to watch. It was great.
Yeah, Pavia is a must-see TV. But now that we got our buddy Tyler Chastain watching, here's my
Oh,
question, and this is going to conclude our conversation for tonight. If we had NIL back in our day, what companies would you have been endorsed by?
Bass Pro Shops and Skeeter Boats. That's who I'd be endorsed by.
Wait, not Gaddy's Pizzeria.
Mr. Gaddy's.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
Mr.
Maybe
Gaddy's.
Mr. Gaddy's.
Yeah, that was oof. Remember those coupons on Sundays? That was
I, I'd
oof.
want to get, maybe a year's supply of Sacco. I would have gladly taken that.
Even now. And thankfully that place
Yeah,
is still around. That's a
it's
must
still
visit.
there.
That's a must visit. Well, Fred, as you know, as we've talked about many times, I could keep you on here for hours, but nobody outside of maybe Dina and just a few select others want to hear some of these stories retold again. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your journey with us tonight.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Bernard. I appreciate you and what you're doing for the program and for the university and documenting all of this. And as much as I love to tease you, you're a brother and love you, man. And I really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you, bud. Love you too. Love Dina, of course, equally. And guys, keep coming back. This is why we do these shows every Tuesday night. We're telling the oral history of the Vanderbilt sports football program, and it does not matter who you were on the program or during your time, whether you were all SEC or you were sitting next to me on the bench. It does not matter what you did. What matters is your journey and you telling your story because those stories are important. The oral history of our program is important. And so that's why we do these each week. It's a labor of love, and I'm going to keep doing them as long as folks keep showing up. So hope you guys have a good night. By the way, we won 16-3 over Tennessee Tech tonight in baseball, in case you're following along. Anchor
Oh,
down.
Vandy boys.